Detective Laura Hayes had been watching Liverpool streets for months, piecing together fragments of a criminal puzzle. Sergeant Marcus Flynn was readying his team for a raid that could change the city forever. And somewhere in the shadows, Dominic Kane, the elusive mastermind of one of Liverpool's most dangerous drug networks, moved with calculated precision, completely unaware that the police were closing in. In the dead of night, the city would hold its breath as a high-stakes operation unfolded, exposing secrets no one thought could be uncovered. Liverpool had always been a city of contrasts, historic streets lined with grand architecture, bustling docks, and vibrant nightlife. Yet pockets of shadow and unease existed beneath its surface. In recent months, those shadows seemed to grow longer, creeping into neighborhoods that had once felt safe. Residents began noticing subtle changes, a new rhythm to the night. Strangers loitering on quiet corners, and cars parked for hours without any apparent reason. At first these signs were dismissed as coincidence or the natural bustle of urban life, but over time, patterns emerged that could not be ignored. Whispers began circulating about drugs moving through the city with alarming efficiency, about people who vanished for days only to return changed, and about small incidents of violence that hinted at something far more sinister beneath the surface. Police officers, both uniformed and in plain clothes, sensed the growing danger. Calls to emergency services painted a fragmented picture, with reports of overdoses, break-ins and assaults rising steadily in certain districts. Yet when investigators tried to follow the trail, it often dissolved. Witnesses were hesitant, memories vague, and physical evidence scarce. Something about the network operating in Liverpool made it unusually difficult to pin down. It was as if the criminals moved in a deliberate rhythm, aware of every step taken by law enforcement, always staying one move ahead. Detectives began to piece together intelligence from multiple sources, tips from informants, surveillance footage, intercepted communications. They started noticing subtle signs, a familiar face in different neighborhoods on consecutive nights, vehicles traveling odd routes at strange hours, small businesses whose financial patterns didn't add up. Each clue suggested a larger system at work, a network that was sophisticated and well-resourced. It wasn't a disorganized group of street-level dealers, it was an operation with certain hierarchy and strategy. What was particularly alarming to the police was the network's apparent ability to remain invisible. Every effort to infiltrate the operation had been met with obstacles. Informants often went silent, surveillance cameras showed only fleeting glimpses of masked faces, and digital communications were heavily encrypted. Each attempt to gather evidence felt like chasing shadows. Despite this, detectives noticed one consistent thread. The network's activities always escalated in certain areas before spreading outward. It was methodical, almost clinical, and it hinted at someone with a precise understanding of both the streets and the law enforcement system itself. Residents' fear grew quietly, but steadily. Local shopkeepers noticed that certain customers always arrived at unusual hours, leaving quickly after brief, whispered transactions. Parents reported children bringing home strange substances, or seeing older teens who seemed to wield influence over their peers. The sense of normalcy that once defined Liverpool's neighborhoods was slowly eroding. Even in broad daylight, a faint tension lingered. A feeling that beneath the familiar hustle and bustle, something dangerous was stirring. Within the police department, an unspoken urgency developed. Investigators worked around the clock, tracking shipments, analyzing financial records, and coordinating with national agencies. Meetings stretched late into the night, filled with maps, photographs, and timelines. Every small breakthrough was celebrated cautiously, because the detectives knew that one wrong move could compromise months of work. The city itself seemed to hold its breath, unaware of the calculated efforts unfolding in offices, cars, and surveillance rooms to dismantle the unseen machinery that had infiltrated its streets. Liverpool's skyline remained unchanged, its historic docks glittering under the night sky, but underneath, the battle lines were being drawn. Detectives knew that sooner or later, the shadows would have to be confronted, and when they were, the confrontation would not be simple. This network was not only criminal, It was clever, adaptive, and dangerous. The question was no longer whether the police could catch them, but whether they could do so before lives were destroyed, and the city's fragile sense of safety shattered completely. Every moment counted, every clue mattered, and the countdown to a decisive action had already begun. For months, Liverpool's police had worked in silence, methodically piecing together a puzzle that seemed to shift with every new discovery. The network they were investigating wasn't just distributing drugs, it was a complex machine, moving money, people and substances with precision that suggested months, if not years of careful planning. Detectives had learned to treat every lead, no matter how small, as potentially explosive. Even a routine observation of a vehicle or a single unusual phone call could unravel the entire network if pursued correctly. The undercover work was painstaking. Officers assumed new identities, ingratiating themselves with peripheral members of the operation. Each meeting carried the risk of exposure, each interaction a potential trap. The criminals were wary, careful to vet anyone new, using codes, passwords, and physical signals to ensure their secrecy. But the police had patience, and over time, they began to gain trust in small doses, collecting crucial snippets of information that, when combined, began to reveal the network's true scope. Hidden warehouses, seemingly abandoned homes, and nondescript vehicles became focal points of surveillance. Every movement was documented, every transfer tracked. Detectives discovered encrypted messages that detailed shipments arriving from overseas ports, meticulously catalogued and divided before distribution. Small businesses which outwardly appeared legitimate were in reality laundering vast sums of cash. Records seized in earlier, smaller busts revealed the network's use of sophisticated software to disguise transactions, moving money through multiple accounts to make detection nearly impossible. The network's ingenuity was matched only by its ruthlessness. Intelligence reports indicated that those who questioned authority or failed to comply were met with intimidation, sometimes escalating to violence. There were reports of anonymous threats left at doors, minor assaults that served as warnings, and even disappearances of individuals who had angered the organization. The detectives realized this wasn't just about drugs, it was a business built on fear, with its power rooted in the community itself. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, as often happens in complex investigations. A routine traffic stop, initially dismissed as ordinary, turned into a critical turning point. A courier, acting nervously, was found with a large shipment of substances and cash. The vehicle itself contained hidden compartments, and inside were records linking mid-level operators to the upper echelons of the network. This accidental discovery cracked open the door that months of surveillance had struggled to open. From that point onward, the investigation accelerated. Analysts pored over financial records, piecing together transactions that revealed not only the hierarchy of the network, but also its geographic reach. From Liverpool, connections stretched across the country, and evidence suggested international ties as well. The police realized they were dealing with a criminal machine that had meticulously planned its growth, anticipating interference and embedding layers of protection against discovery. Even more unsettling were the hints of violence associated with the operation. Seized communications suggested involvement in unsolved assaults and at least one suspected murder. The level of organization and the willingness to enforce control through intimidation marked the network as extraordinarily dangerous. This wasn't a collection of street dealers. It was a strategic, well-protected syndicate, operating with military-like precision. Detectives began to map out the key players, noting patterns in behavior, movements, and alliances. They coordinated with specialized units and prepared tactical plans, aware that any misstep could result in loss of evidence, or worse, endanger lives. Each day brought new revelations, from hidden labs producing highly dangerous substances, to secure locations that had remained undetected for years. The sense of urgency deepened, because as the police worked to dismantle the network, the criminals continued to operate, their reach extending further with each passing day. By the time the investigation reached its peak, the officers knew one thing with absolute certainty. They had the evidence and the opportunity, but executing the next move would be dangerous and decisive. The network had infiltrated every corner of the city it could, and the police had to strike before it adapted once more. The tension was tangible, a quiet drumbeat beneath the city's normal rhythms, signaling that the night when shadows would be confronted was approaching, and no one could predict exactly what would unfold when it finally arrived. As the investigation reached its critical stage, tension within the police department was palpable. Every officer, analyst, and tactical unit member knew the gravity of what was about to unfold. The network in Liverpool was not a simple criminal enterprise, it was a well-oiled machine, adaptive and ruthless. Any misstep could compromise months of painstaking work or worse, result in injury or death. For weeks, plans had been drawn, redrawn and rehearsed. Maps of warehouses, escape routes, and surrounding streets were studied in meticulous detail. Teams practiced room-by-room entries in abandoned buildings that mimicked the network's location. Every possible scenario, from armed resistance to the unexpected presence of civilians, had been simulated and accounted for. Meanwhile, intelligence continued to pour in. Surveillance cameras captured familiar vehicles making unusual detours. Phone records hinted at last-minute instructions being sent across the city. Even casual observation revealed signs of unease among the network's members. Small mistakes that hinted they sensed change in the air. The precise, coordinated effort, a high-stakes gamble where timing and discipline would determine success or failure. The criminals themselves were restless, unaware that the web of surveillance and intelligence had already ensnared them. Small errors became increasingly visible. Messages sent without full encryption, strangers noticed near secure locations, and unusual patterns of movement suggesting anxiety or anticipation. Yet even these warning signs were too subtle for them to act decisively. The network had operated with such care for so long that it was almost impossible to believe anyone could finally dismantle it. Inside the police command center, a sense of urgency was tempered by confidence. Officers knew they had gathered the evidence needed for arrests and prosecution. They had mapped the network's finances, tracked its key players, and identified its weapons and defensive measures. Still, there was no underestimating the risks. Each team member prepared mentally for the unknown, the possibility of encountering armed resistance, the presence of hidden traps or even civilians caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. As the hours passed, toward the early morning, the tension became almost tangible, stretching across the city like a hidden current. Liverpool slept, unaware that its streets were about to host one of the most daring operations in its recent history. And while the officers double-checked every detail, the network remained unaware that the moment they had long anticipated when shadows and secrecy would finally be confronted was almost upon them. The countdown to the overnight raid had begun, and nothing would ever be the same. At precisely 2:00 a.m., the quiet streets of Liverpool became the backdrop for a calculated storm. Police vehicles glided into position with flashing lights off, engines silent, surrounding multiple locations simultaneously. Tactical teams moved like shadows, every officer aware of their role, every step rehearsed for months. The element of surprise was absolute. The network, which had thrived in secrecy for years, would have no warning. The first breach was swift and precise. Doors were kicked open, flashbangs deployed, and teams moved in formation, clearing each room systematically. Inside the warehouses, officers found more than they had anticipated. Large shipments of drugs were stacked neatly, awaiting distribution, alongside bundles of cash and weapons carefully hidden in compartments. Every item seized was a piece of a puzzle that revealed the full extent of the criminal operation. But the raid's biggest shock came when a floorboard lifted to reveal a hidden tunnel leading to a neighboring building. It was clear the network had planned for contingencies, escape routes, secret storage areas, and even safe houses. The discovery sent a ripple through the officers, who realized that the criminals had not just been sophisticated. They had anticipated discovery and prepared to disappear without a trace. Throughout the raid, chaos and danger coexisted with precision. A brief confrontation erupted when a few armed members of the network resisted arrest. Officers were forced to take cover as shouts and the sounds of scuffling filled the warehouse. Several were injured, though thankfully none fatally. It was a reminder that these were not ordinary criminals, they were desperate, capable, and dangerous. Yet despite the resistance, the operation continued with disciplined coordination. Each team moved according to plan, securing evidence, making arrests, and neutralizing threats. Elsewhere in the city, simultaneous raids revealed smaller but equally significant sites. Vehicles were impounded, safe houses emptied, and digital devices seized. Every location provided more insight into the network's operations, exposing not just the street-level dealers, but the shadowy figures orchestrating the enterprise from behind the scenes. Analysts worked in real time, cataloging evidence, decrypting files, and confirming the identities of key players. Each revelation deepened the understanding of how far the network's influence had spread. By dawn, the streets of Liverpool were transformed. Dozens of suspects were in custody, warehouses emptied, and the city's criminal underworld had been dealt a decisive blow. Tactical units continued to comb through hidden compartments, while forensic teams meticulously documented every finding. What had begun as a single tip months earlier had culminated in a coordinated strike that dismantled a dangerous, well-hidden network. Yet, even in the aftermath, surprises continued to emerge. Among the digital records were financial transactions and communications implicating individuals previously thought to be untouchable, suggesting connections to the network that extended far beyond street-level operations. The scope of the criminal enterprise, once hidden in shadows, was now laid bare, revealing a web of influence and corruption that would take months, if not years, to fully unravel. For the officers involved, the raid was both a victory and a lesson. It had demonstrated the power of careful intelligence, patient planning, and coordinated action. Liverpool's residents, meanwhile, would awaken to a city changed, one in which a sophisticated network of crime had been struck at its core. The raid would be remembered not just for its success, but for the courage and precision that allowed it to unfold without catastrophic loss of life. By the time the sun rose over the docks, the operation was over. But the implications were only beginning. The network had been dismantled, but its shadowy presence had left marks on the city, marks that would take years to fully erase. And yet, for the first time in a long time, the streets of Liverpool were safer. The silent fear that had haunted neighborhoods now replaced with a cautious optimism that justice had prevailed, at least for now. In the weeks following the raid, Liverpool began to breathe a little easier, though the memory of the operation lingered in the minds of those who had witnessed it. News outlets covered the arrests in detail, but behind the headlines, the work was far from over. Police departments coordinated investigations to ensure that every seized asset, every document, and every digital record was analyzed thoroughly. Each piece of evidence had the potential to expose further criminal activity, leading to additional arrests and dismantling remaining fragments of the network. For the residents of Liverpool, the changes were immediate, yet subtle. Streets that had once been patrolled by suspicious vehicles and loiterers now felt quieter. Shopkeepers reported a noticeable drop in unusual activity, and parents began to feel safer, allowing their children to walk home from school. The sense of normalcy was returning, though tempered by the awareness that the network had operated undetected for years. There was a lingering question in everyone's mind: how many other networks could be lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike? The investigation revealed a series of unexpected connections. Among the seized records were financial documents and encrypted communications that suggested indirect ties to prominent figures, business owners, community leaders, and even officials who had previously seemed untouchable. These revelations sparked broader inquiries, hinting that the network's influence had extended far beyond street-level operations. It was a sobering reminder that criminal enterprises could infiltrate society in ways that were invisible to the public eye, blending legitimacy with corruption. Law enforcement continued to press forward. Prosecutors meticulously built cases against those arrested, using the extensive evidence gathered during the raid. The complexity of the network meant that trials would be lengthy, with witnesses, forensic evidence, and digital records all playing crucial roles. For the police, it was a race against time, ensuring that every suspect faced justice while preventing any remnants of the network from regrouping. The operation had been a victory, but the real challenge was ensuring it remained permanent. The raid also became a case study in strategy and coordination. Across the country, law enforcement agencies examined the tactics used. From months of undercover work to precise tactical planning, it demonstrated the importance of patience, intelligence gathering, and collaboration, and served as a warning to other criminal organizations that sophisticated networks could be dismantled if investigators remained vigilant. Yet the human cost was undeniable. Families of those arrested faced the harsh realities of criminal consequences, and some officers carried the weight of injuries sustained during the operation. For everyone involved, there was a shared recognition that, while the raid had been necessary, it had left lasting impressions, both physical and psychological. As the months passed, the city slowly adjusted. Liverpool's docks, once a hub of illicit activity, returned to routine operations. Neighborhoods that had been tense with fear now echoed with everyday life. The officers who had risked everything reflected on the operation as a turning point, not just in their careers, but in the ongoing battle against organized crime. They had entered the shadows, faced danger, and emerged victorious, proving that vigilance and perseverance could reclaim the streets from those who sought to dominate them through fear. In the end, the dismantling of the network was more than a single operation. It was a reminder of the fragile balance between order and chaos. Liverpool had survived the storm, but the story of the overnight raid remained a cautionary tale. Sophisticated criminal enterprises could hide in plain sight, and only through dedication, courage, and relentless pursuit of justice could they be exposed. The city had been tested, and in the darkest hours of the night, its defenders had proven that even the most hidden shadows could be confronted and ultimately overcome.